going to be talking through the importance of developers and how developers can play a key role in helping your business innovate, particularly using APIs as a channel. So just some logistics. We're going to go through the whole presentation. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. That's the easiest way to keep track. Make sure you don't forget what questions you have, and we'll do question and answer at the end. So I don't have an agenda laid out here, but just so you know, really what we want to talk about today is innovation, and especially in the context of developers. So innovation seems to be a huge, huge consideration for companies today, which is a little bit funny just because obviously innovation isn't a goal unto itself. But I think it's fair to say that we work with companies all the time who are almost treating it like an end business goal. They're saying we need to be more innovative, right? We need to go through a digital transformation, right? Or even just cutting to the chase, we need to be more like Uber, or like Facebook, or like Google, and so on. And this, I think maybe the last point drives it home. Right? All these companies today, when you think about innovation, it becomes synonymous with technological innovation or digital innovation. Pretty much all the innovation that's happening is being software driven. We're seeing industries that are being completely disrupted, and we're seeing companies that have had business models for years and years and years just be obsoleted by the fact that the world is changing, and it's changing in a digital way. And so, fundamentally under the covers of all this, everyone has the drive. Everybody wants to innovate. Everybody wants to be agile and be able to pivot and be able to mimic the success of these digital unicorn companies that have cropped up from being no names to being some of the most well-recognized brands in the world. But the big question is, of course, how do you do that? And again, it's one of the other quick conclusions that's drawn is developers. If everything is software-driven, we know that developers are important. And I think the role of developers is something that's, and by the way, if you don't recognize the graphic there, that's Steve Ballmer, who I'm not even sure if the date has been established yet, at which Microsoft conference he was at, but he went on a tirade, if you go on YouTube, talking about, all he said was developers, developers, developers. So he may not have got his assessment of the iPhone right, but he certainly knew that developers are important and made a good point here. So we all know developers are important. The problem is developers there's all sorts of different kinds of developers. There's all sorts of different types of software. There's different paths and ways that companies can innovate, but we know that developers are important. And really, how important are developers? And by the way, I've got, if you look at the link on this slide here, the slides, the follow-up, I've got an article talking about the importance of developers, not just to innovation, but to the economy overall. But, this is why. Really, we are in the digital age, and that's why I think we've seen the stability of, let's say, the 20th century economy, which was really established by the industrial age. We're seeing such huge disruption at the dawn of this century, this millennium, because everything is changing to factor in this digital economy. So right now, we've seen projections that by the year 2020, there are going to be 1 million more software engineering jobs than we would have supply for. That's one side of the equation. But for the economy overall, the other side is that all the other jobs are really stagnating. So if you look at the economy overall, throughout the 20th century, there was this trend that productivity, so the output of the economy, was always growing at the same rate as the jobs that were being created. What's happened now, because of the incredible efficiency offered by the digital economy and by software-based solutions and automation, and what's happening now as opposed to industrial jobs just being replaced, now we're seeing more knowledge worker type jobs being replaced by software. While the productivity continues to grow as a result of that, the actual job growth has completely flatlined. And the real growth is in these software engineering jobs. So what that means is those who are developers hold even more power in this economy. And so, you know, if you're not getting into the software field, you're on the wrong side of the ledger here. But what it means from a company perspective when we're looking at trying to innovate and trying to utilize these developer resources, it means that they're becoming even more scarce relatively, that trying to vie for the attention of developers is something that is extremely important in this economy. But, you know, how do we do that? How do we work in this new digital age? Well, a couple of big thinkers on the topic have weighed in and said one of the keys is modularity. So Brian Arthur wrote this book, Nature of Technology, fascinating read, which really dives into how innovation happens, how invention happens, and what makes technology technology. There's some really interesting definitions in there that I don't have the time to get into, but he said something really interesting, which is that modularity is to a technological economy what the division of labor is to a manufacturing economy. And the reason that this is important is that if you look back in the industrial age, it was really the division of labor that allowed the industrial economy to take off. When at the early days when Ford put in the assembly line, there was this ability to really mainstream those manufacturing jobs, as opposed to the past where you'd have individual experts who might build an entire piece of technology by themselves. When it came to trying to get cars on a large scale and sell them into every household, you just needed more people and more roles to do that. So division of labor came in, the assembly line came in as a way to do that. When it comes to the world of technology, and specifically software, modularity plays the same role. Being able to break software up into components and build those things individually is something that becomes extremely important. Clayton Christensen wrote a book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and followed that up with a book called The Innovator's Solution, which really he's examining the problem of when companies start out and they're very innovative and agile, once they become successful and they have those successful business models, how do they keep innovating? Because it almost becomes against their nature to innovate as they have business models built on reaping the rewards of their original innovation, right? How do you defend against competitors? Again, pointing out that modularity is extremely important in terms of positioning yourself for ongoing innovation and ongoing ability to thrive against competitors who may be more disruptive than startups. So again, going back to the question of developers, we can look and say, well, modularity could be a key here to helping mainstream software development get more appeal, make things easier and more productive for developers. And those of us who've worked in software a long time have seen this since the start of software development. Originally, we had procedures that could be reused within code. We then, moved into the object-oriented world and had objects that could be reused and packaged. Later on, we've seen web services at the post-web boom, and more recently, microservices is a big trend where we're seeing entire applications being decomposed into these smaller modules. Right? The common thread to all of these is the way that they're accessed is through APIs. So maybe the earlier two was more of a programmatic framework for APIs, but obviously web services, microservices, it's all about access through web APIs, network APIs, and in certain cases, open access APIs on the web itself. So, key to innovation is developers. Key to developer innovation is really APIs. But are APIs enough? I think we've got, as we've gotten more mature around the ecosystem of APIs, we've seen that they are used quite well as building blocks. When we think about APIs as building blocks, but are those building blocks enough? What we found over time is we really need tools for developers. Developers are always looking for tools that can make it easier to use those building blocks. And in the case of APIs, we've got good examples of those with SDKs and so on, as well as instructions. So, you always need to know how to use the APIs, how to use the tools, and so on. And actually, maybe we just need to look closer at the Scandinavian marketplace. I've got 3 images here from Lego as building blocks, Minecraft is a wildly popular video game for kids, and IKEA furniture. All of them came out of the world or all of them came out of Scandinavian invention, and they're all great examples of modularity. But, you know, I think there's this notion of the developer experience, which is something that in the API world is extremely important, because in the world of the web, user experience, we think we know the value of that and we understand end users in that context. In the world of APIs, the end user is essentially the developer who can take that API building block and build something new, combine it to build something new. And so, you know, there's a lot that's needed here. So I think that, you know, I think it's fair to say that as time's moved along, companies accept, yes, we know that we need to be more innovative. They accept that, yes, we know that we need more developers involved to innovate. And I think that it's gaining more widespread acceptance that in order to get those developers involved and get them to help innovate your business, APIs are a key tool. But really the crux of what we're going to talk about today is how what you need to do in order to get developers to help you innovate your business with APIs. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn, who's going to tell you how to do just that.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt was mentioning, I mean, this presentation is about developers and, you know, developers for innovation because of the digital economy. So we do need people that are experienced in developing software and building APIs. But the other piece, too, is the whole open innovation concept, where you may not be building it in-house, you may be looking outside to use developers outside your organization. And as well, the whole concept of developers isn't new, but it's really growing a lot lately. So many developers now, you know, maybe have 3, 4, 5 years of experience. So it's still a pretty green industry from that perspective. So when you're coming together to develop your developer experience, your developer community, your developer program, you really need to keep all of that in mind. So let me go through some of my slides here to give you a better idea how you do really work with developers and launch that experience. So this is typically where our company comes in. They come to us and they go, oh, we've got an API now, and let's do a hackathon. And for our organization, what we do is we support companies building their developer programs, their developer communities, do developer marketing. And what we really say to them is, not so fast. Let's just take a step back here and figure out exactly why you want to hold a hackathon, why you've created these APIs, and how you work with developers. So doing a hackathon, probably not the best first step. Because the funny thing about open innovation, it doesn't work so well, and we've seen this quite a bit too, is whether people are saying it overtly or not, or we can just sort of tell behind the scenes. If you're trying to get somebody else to do your work for you, that's not going to work. Really need to think about this as a partnership as you work along with developers, and whether they're inside your company or, again, external developers for some external innovation. It really is about a partnership and working together. As mentioned, there's a lot of different kinds of innovation programs, and whether you want to call it a partner program or an open source program or a developer program or an API program, the concept, it's the same, and it's about working with a group of people to help you co-create. So I put together some guidelines for developer engagement, and we'll go through these. Where context, you know, we say CIA. Context, really important. I'll walk through what that means and what you can do about it. Your intent and how you communicate that intent around your API program is super important. And then what action you do. So we'll go through some of that as we go through the slides here. So I always go through a number of different examples, and I came up with this one last weekend. So, you know, think for a minute. I'm going to give you a bag of rice and say, make me something. Make me a dish. So, give yourself a minute and think, what exactly are you going to create if somebody just says, here's this tool for you. We've got some rice, make a dish. Some of you might be thinking, I'm just going to make plain old rice. And others might think, well, I'm going to get a little more fancy and I need a few more tools. I need some Parmesan cheese and something else. I'm going to make a risotto. Well, here's what I ended up making. I'm a big fan of paella, and got a little bit of creative on this one for my mom's 75th birthday. But how many of you would have thought exactly this same thing? And part of that's the point is if you don't provide, developers, the people you're working with some context around what you want them to create, you never know what you're going to get. So let's try this again. So here's some tools for you. Got a bunch of tools. Build something for me. Think about what that might be. Maybe you're going to build a house. Maybe you're going to build, I don't know, what would you build, Matt, if I gave you these tools?
I'd probably try to build a guitar.
A guitar?
I'm not sure how well it would play.
I would never have thought of that one. Would you need a hard hat to build a guitar?
The way I build it, probably.
So here's another one that I found on the internet. There's a chair. It's a cardboard chair. I'm not sure how sturdy it would be. But again, if you don't provide that right context, and we've seen this quite a few times, especially around hackathons, is you end up with something you don't really want. So let's go through some of the ways where you're going to end up with something that you do want. There's a lot of myths around developers. Lots of smart people, lots of really great educated people, but they don't necessarily read minds, and honestly, not all of them are creative. So you really need to help them paint that picture. You really need to provide the tools for them. You need to manage your expectations about what your program is and what you're wanting to provide and create, and you need to manage their expectations as well. You might want something that's very simple, or you might want something that's more complex and creative, and developers don't know that unless you tell them and you provide the right tools for them. So context is really about, who are you? What's this all about? Why should they care? We worked with a retailer to do some hackathons and some programs a while ago, and because in the beginning they did not provide context, they tended to get applications that were, find me the store. Well, Google Maps already does that. You don't need somebody spending hours building an application just to find your stores. So for instance, if you're in retail and you want to provide some context, you need to provide these people with, what are the demographics? Sure, you might have 2 million SKUs, but what are your top selling categories? Are you the #1 retailer of baby products? Are you the #1 retailer of cooking ware? You need to let developers know that so they can get creative and provide some context around that. What's the selling cycle? Do people, if you're thinking about, building something, people always come back to, even though they're coming back for some nails, chances are they're going to buy something else too. So how do you fit that into that sales process, get developers to understand that so they can create that better experience? Listed a few other ideas and suggestions here, but again, think about it. If you're in health, how do users and who are the users that make decisions? Is it more about education? Is it more about screening? You really need to provide that kind of information. In the Internet of Things too, everybody's, well, we've got all these new APIs and different tools and processes for IoT. Build us something. Well, sure, but if you're in the auto industry, then let's get focused on the auto industry and get people to know about the context around that, factories, home, work, whatever. And you really need to understand and get your developers to understand, what do you want these users to really do? Do you want them to buy something from you? Maybe you just want them to locate you. Maybe you want them to vote for you. And here in Canada and the US, we're all into sort of election mode here. Maybe you just want a better servicing, a DIY service. Maybe you want faster decision making. You really need to understand that concept, and you need to communicate that concept to developers. So here's a few ways that you can do it, some real practical ways. We'll talk about portals in a bit, but everything tends to be driven in the beginning truly from your portal and where you're providing that information. So make sure you've got a really clear About Us that says what your program is all about and who you are. And it's not just your About Us for your own page, but your About Us for your developer program. In terms of verticals and end users, have a place on your site that talks about that. Use use cases to provide some different scenarios that describe who your user is. Sometimes it's not enough to say, well, my user is somebody that comes in for health care. Okay, are they old? Are they young? What part of the country do they have? Do they have money? Do they not have money? Those sort of things are important, how they make their decisions. Case studies are always really good too, and whether you've developed these case studies or perhaps you've gotten some developed by some of your developers already that you can showcase, fantastic. Always gives a better perspective about what's going on. And you can't over-message. You really can't over-message. So message about what you're trying to achieve and what some of this context is. Here's, I just put a couple of examples up of sites. So the top one is something from Twilio, where you can see they've chosen a number of different case studies of apps that have already been created. And if you take a look at it really closely, it's quite a different range of verticals too, from American Red Cross to Uber to Porch to Nordstrom's. So right there, somebody coming in, a developer goes, okay, I can probably get some good ideas for one of those because it's a different industry or it's one of my industries. Similar to the one for Sears, as opposed to just providing somebody with the API, here's a couple of suggestions about use cases that might be really interesting. Back to school, something for the grandkids, new arrivals to watch for. So there's always a lot of good ideas out there, and it helps developers a lot if you can provide that for them. So next up in our CIA, after you've really thought about the context around your API, you really need to also communicate what your intent is, and hopefully you know what that is. So hopefully you know what you want to get from your API. And innovation is one of those terms that, as Matt mentioned, it's a little nebulous. What does it really mean? Do you want faster time to market? Do you want lower cost, increased traffic? Whatever it is, you need to be really clear on what you want to get out of it, which really means what do you want your developers to do with your APIs? What do you want them to help you do? And again, you really need to communicate that. So depending on what your intent is and how you communicate it, that's really going to equal what your outcome is. And again, you've got to be really careful what you wish for, or sometimes what you don't wish for in terms of what you don't communicate. So maybe you want apps. So why do you want apps? Make sure you let folks know what that intent is. For a lot of folks who are just opening up their API programs internally or externally, they're just looking for new ideas. They just are looking for something creative. And that's okay. Just be really clear about how you're communicating that to the developers. You really need to be honest about it. Honestly, some people, especially some companies, when they just get going, they really want somebody to debug their code and look through their documentation, which many developers are more than welcome. Really, they actually really like doing. And just be open with it, or you risk damaging those relationships up front, and you're never going to get them back again. So just be really thoughtful. Probably not, I mean, it certainly could be maybe short-term, but maybe not necessarily long-term. We've seen, especially a number of brands, well, we're just doing it, we're opening up APIs, and we're holding hackathons, and we're working with outside developers because everybody else is, and because we want to look innovative. So it really becomes a brand exercise. Be really careful when you do that. Because it could really work against you if you don't have all the pieces, if you're not honest about it. And you can only go back to developers so many times and ask them to help you out, and if you're not giving back, you're really going to risk your reputation on that. So be really clear on what your intent is, because that will definitely affect what your outcome is. And again, you really need to have a goal. It's about co-creation. It's about a goal where everybody wins and everybody participates through that whole cycle from when you get started in your API to when it's, the application or the end product is actually launched from that. So how do you provide intent? So again, in your About Us or your Hackathon information, be really clear about what your program is, who it's for, the type of program it is, and what you're looking for. Segmentation is a super important exercise. We do some other presentations when we talk about how many developers are out there in the world, and there's over 50 million of them. So when you say you're just looking for developers, you really need to narrow that down a bit, and you need to understand, who can be that best co-creation partner for you. What kind of technical skills do they need? What sort of personal experience do they have? Where are they located? What kind of business can best work with you and help you with your goals? So segmentation, super important exercise. And rewards are really important too, and we see too many times where developers are creating applications that directly benefit, again, coming back to retail, maybe you're getting developers to develop a new app that, helps people pick out, new back-to-school clothes, which is good timing for right now. So are developers going to make a percentage off any referrals? Are they able to put advertising in their applications? If you don't offer something, if you don't allow for that, or at least pay them for their application, it's not going to work. It's a job too. It's a calling for them, and they need to be rewarded as much as you do. Always back to communication. You can't over-message any of this, and really treat your API like a product. If it's something that's just tossed over the fence to some folks in your department just to see what happens, it's probably not going to make it very far. Treat it like a product and get engaged through the whole stage of the process. Here's a couple of examples of folks that have been really good with their intent, and you can see it's right up front. Here's how you understand Pusher. This is what SendGrid is all about, and here's what who SendGrid is for. Be really clear and upfront. There's no reason why you need to hide that or try and make people guess as to who you are and what your intent is. So next up, after our CIA, when we've gone through some context and we've looked at our intent, action. And here's something that's really different that most folks don't understand, and even when you think you're creating this product, because your end goal around APIs and working with developers is creation with those common goals and common wins, your communication and your participation through this doesn't end with purchase or uptake. So just because the developers come along and they've downloaded your API, you're not done. Because if you don't help them along to that process where the end user of the application is using it, nobody's really going to win. And it's quite different from, if we go back to our building product or our rice examples. So Matt's developed this guitar, and he, the difference with APIs is he actually won't make any money with that guitar until that guitar actually gets sold and somebody else is using it, which is very different. So, which means if I'm providing those growth tools for him and providing the saws and the wood, I'm going to be making some money off of that too. So we need to make sure that everybody along that chain is going to be rewarded, or at the end you're not going to get rewarded either or have a very good sort of end product that somebody is going to use. And again, whether that's an application or some sort of web service or a microservice, you really need to be involved through that whole process. And really how you do that is about putting these proper pieces in place and creating a developer community around it. So it means you need to do a little bit of hard work too. So what's the most important pieces around action is what we call onboarding. And it's the process of getting a developer to use your product or service. So it's not even just getting to your website and finding out what you're all about. It's not even just downloading your API and checking it out and looking through your documentation. They got to build something too. So how do you actually onboard them and get them to do that? And so you need to minimize the hurdles, the obstacles, the friction for them getting started and going live. This is the point where you're going to lose the most amount of developers, but it's something you've got a lot of control over. And it typically starts with your portal. And it really does. This is, we're in industries where, everything is really online. So you really need to make sure that the first place that developers will come and check you out and find out about your context and your intent and how you want to engage with them is your portal. So you really need to have that done very well, be very conscious of it, have really good information on it, and it's something that you need to be engaged with all the time and keep changing it. Here's a couple of examples of developer portals in action that do come from some templates from CA. Do you want to make any sort of note about that, Matt?
Yeah, no, I mean, these are CA API management customers who have used our portal product to build the portal. So as you can see, in terms of aligning with intent, we've got some very good tools and resources available and a very different look and feel between what Zipcar is offering out to developers that might use their API and then Alaska Airlines and what they might do. But as you said, this is the first place you want to make a good impression, and you want to make it as easy as possible for those developers to get the tools.
Yeah, get them to understand who you are and how to get started. And when you are working with different companies who provide you with these kind of templates, or indeed if you are sort of creating your own portal with a different back end attached, just make sure you've got a lot of flexibility in how you present your information, because your company is going to, you may have another Zipcar-like company, but your culture and the way you present things might be different. So you really want to make sure that you're able to customize things as much as you can. So how do you provide some action? Make it really easy for developers to get started. We talk a lot about first time to hello. How quickly can they actually use your API and get something moving? Can you do it in under 5 minutes? That tends to be the benchmark these days. So figure out, make sure your time to first hello is going to be really fast. Have documentation that's concise and that's correct. Have a quick guide. We've seen quick guides that are 36 pages. I wouldn't say that's very quick. And documentation that tends to be very, just really complicated and doesn't follow a good process. And typically you want somebody from outside the organization, whether internally or externally, that's actually created the APIs, because the documentation from the people that create the APIs tends to usually lack a little bit, just because it's in their head and they just sort of don't realize that, these things are important to get down on paper because people aren't mind readers. Have code samples and have libraries. Yes, developers of all shapes and sizes and experience cut and paste. Developers cut and paste all the time. So if you want to avoid errors and just make things easy, you've got to have some code samples and you need to have some libraries. And libraries just make routine code easy and have a number of different languages that developers use that are available too. So code samples, libraries, really important on the action part. And people, Matt and I were talking about this earlier. It's the people that always screw things up, no matter how great the technology is. And evangelists tend to be the glue that really holds all the sides together. So no matter where your API or developer programs sit within your organization, it could be in the technical side, it could be product development, it could be innovation, it could be mobile, it could be marketing. All those sides still need to talk to each other, along with your external developers who are using your API products. And evangelists tend to be that glue that can talk to all sides and sync up with that communication. So it's important to have the right people in place and people who are serious about this. Must provide support. Evangelists can do some of that, but you never know what time of day or what country or what sort of time zone people are going to be in. If you're not familiar with Stack Overflow or GitHub, please go and check them out and make sure that your API program is active on there. That's where developers, it's the #1 spot that developers go to check things out. They're going to check you out there. They're going to go there for support there. So do use services like Stack Overflow and GitHub for supporting your program. And then, of course, events. We do tend to be in quite an event-driven industry. And, you know, there's a lot of developer programs out there that hold their own DevCons. You can get involved with a lot of other ones that are out there as well. And, you know, just going out and meeting with folks and understanding who they are and what they need and making those personal connections are always really great to help share information and cite those passions. There's a couple of examples of some good sort of portals and action items. On the top is a site that's actually bragging. It's a Samsung site that's bragging about their time to hello world was done in 4 minutes, which is actually a really good thing to brag about. So, you know, make sure you're really clear about, put that up front. Stripe, which I'm sure a lot of you are, you know, hear about, again, very upfront. Here's our API libraries, and here's what we have to offer with some different languages. And on the right-hand side is a code snippet from the PayPal Braintree folks. Code. Cutting and pasting will happen all the time. So do make that available on your site. We do, along with onboarding, we do a 7-point API onboarding review, which really pulls all of those pieces together. I didn't go through all of them, things like registration. We've seen registration processes that, you know, you literally make it unusable to use. You don't need all the information you probably think you do. First impressions, again, along your context and intent. So you can always sort of take a look at these slides on our site or on the slides when you get a moment. But it's really important to have all those different pieces in place, and most of them we've talked about already. So if you want to look at a few more websites, these are some poster kids who really got it right. You'll see they continue to innovate on their portals and the information that they do provide. Keep in mind, though, with these companies, they may be different from you, especially if you're coming from government or retail or enterprise where API isn't your core business. With these folks, with Twilio, with Stripe, with PubNub, with SendGrid, the API is their company. It's their core business. They had to get it right. So, you know, why not, you know, learn from these folks and take some of the good things that they've done and use it on your own site. So it's your job to make sure that the creation can and does take place. So again, it's about co-creation, it's about working together to make that happen and providing all that action for you. So in summary, Matt, I'm going to point to you to do the summary to see if you've been paying attention.
Okay, here's my test. No, I think that, you know, the whole point here is that companies have to be innovative, whether that's the ultimate end goal or not. It's just table stakes now in the digital age. And we know, I think we've shown, and I think everybody's accepting now that APIs are a key channel to help innovate, period, but to really get that developer-driven innovation happening. And I think, you know, your last point there, or one of the last points there around those companies that have actually built products around APIs, that's something that is pretty remarkable in pure digital age economy stuff. But the fact that you can build a company around an API just points out how powerful it can be. So no, you know, this is not to say that every company needs to go and become Twilio, but you can certainly learn from those, and maybe one of the key lessons is treat it as a product. Make sure it has the right resources and intention. Always be putting yourself in the consumer shoes. And I think you came up with a very good model around the right sequence of things in terms of establishing context, intent, and action, and always keeping your goals in mind. This is not about putting some web addressable thing out there. It's about actually coming up and co-creating, coming up with win-win partnership solutions that can exploit the API. So I think this is we've just kind of covered the surface of the topic area. And
that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more places to go more deeply, and so if we look into some ways that you can take action following this webinar, we talked about the importance of a portal. We have our CA API Management SaaS offering, which is a hosted portal and gateway API management solution that you can try out. We included the link there. with us in the API Academy, if you want to learn generally about strategy, architecture, and design, we have our API Academy site there. We go to lots of events, and hopefully we'll have one in your area soon. But I think, Carol, and your company, WIP, does some phenomenal work with developers and helping companies big and small build out their developer programs. So you've got a number of good resources here to let people know.
Thanks. Yeah, you'll find a little bit more information on our site, whipfactory.com, and happy to give you a complimentary 7-point onboarding assessment. We'll give you a mini one if you'd like that. We'll quickly take a look at your portal and give you some tips about what you might want to do. But we get quite active in coming in and helping folks build their programs, revamp their programs, or perhaps you're wanting to head off in a different direction. So we do come in and do a couple of day workshops for you that we'd love to do if you're interested.
Great. And we're actually the API Days event in London coming up later this month. We'll be having a half-day workshop run by our API Academy, which will include WIP as well on the discussion. It's actually focusing. The event itself is focused on the financial services industry. We're going to do a little bit of a focus on something that's quite popular in the financial services industry, which is not only looking at open API innovation, but internal innovation and all the different groups that can collaborate within an organization to come up with this developer-driven innovation.
If you head to London, say hi to my colleague, Carlo.
Yeah. Great. So I think, just a little bit more here on WIP as one of our great partners, and